A very good morning to one and all attending this session today. On behalf of the Entrepreneurship Development Cell of St. Xavier's College, Autonomous Kolkata, I would like to thank each one of you for being a part of the audience in today's speaker session. I would like to extend a warm welcome to a highly passionate individual with rich global experience, proven leadership, and deep strategic insight. It is my honor to present to you Mr. Deepak Sapra, someone with more than 20 years of experience as the Chief Executive Officer at Dr. Reddy's API Services. We are extremely thrilled and honored to have you join us, sir. At the same time, we are grateful to you for taking out time for a session with us from your busy schedule. On behalf of everyone at EDC, I wish all attendees of this session a riveting experience as they hear Mr. Sapra share his intriguing insights on competing in a global economy. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Am I audible? Wonderful. Fine. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be talking to you and to the rest of your colleagues here. Thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, I want to start by saying that it feels great to reconnect to Calcutta. I spent a large part of my childhood in Calcutta. We spent a lot of time in South Calcutta. We used to live on Belvedere Road. And Park Street was a place where we used to go often. And Xavier's, the original campus, was a much admired place, which we used to cross by. And it feels great to be speaking with students from this esteemed institution. So thank you so much. And I hope I'll be able to add value to this group over the course of the next 1 hour. So from those times in the 90s, what I just spoke about, what I just reminisced about, to now, it seems that the entire world has changed. And as I look back at some of the trends and try to put some sort of a pattern to these trends, it's almost surreal. It's almost stunning in a way to see the non-linear impact of many of these on our life and the life of every individual that we see around us today. So I want to illustrate this shift from the time I used to admire Xavier's to now, I still do, through some examples. And these examples hopefully will set the tone for the topic that we have today. And we'll be able to get a better sense of how to compete in a global economy on the basis of some of these trends that I see, which have happened over the course of the past 25, 30 years. So let me start with the first example. And this is something which is all over the papers in the last few days. In the 1990s, the world was actually gearing up for a very big milestone. The milestone was of global population. The global population at that point of time was sitting at less than 6 billion. It was about, I think, 5.9 billion in 1998. And then the following year, it would finally break the 6 billion mark. Fast forward today to 25 years later, our population as a planet is more than 8 billion. And India, in the last couple of days, we've been hearing has overtaken China, and the UN officially said that India now has the largest number of people in the world, and especially the people in the young category, and that kind of far exceeds any other nation on this planet. So it's not just actually the global population that has exploded from, let's say, a 6 billion to an 8 billion over the course of 25 to 30 years. The demographics and composition has changed as well. In the 1990s, less than half of the world's population was living in urban areas. And I was tracking some data from the World Bank. In 2007, this population eclipsed the 50% mark. And today, close to about 60% of people in the world live in urban areas. And that number could reach as high as about 2/3, which is about 65, 66% by 2050, putting further strain on cities that are being pushed to the brink. So that was example one, which I wanted to share in terms of the shift that somebody like me has seen in the course of my own lifetime over the past 2 to 3 decades. Then the second example I want to share with you is something which probably most of you on this call would even find it hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine for most of us today, a world without the internet. But that was not the case in the 1990s. In fact, the first time I accessed the internet, I remember it very clearly. It was as a youngster in college in the year 1996 at a cyber cafe on Brigade Road in Bangalore. At that point of time, in 1996, I paid 120 rupees for a 30-minute access to this amazing new technology. And in those 30 minutes, I created my first email account at that point of time on a service provider called Hotmail, set up then by a person of Indian origin, an entrepreneur of Indian origin living in the US, a person by the name Sabir Bhatia. Later that year, in one of my experiments at a lab in IIT Kharagpur, I sent the first email of my life, which was incidentally to myself, because I did not know anyone who had an email ID to whom I could send an email. So I just wanted to share this example that from those time in the 90s to even in the early 2000s, even in a country like the United States, only about 35 to 40% of the population was online compared to what we see today, everyone, everywhere. And it was also in the 90s that a small little company called Google was born. Although back then, the way it was very different from what it looks today. Net, I think the reason for sharing example two is that the internet has transformed virtually every aspect of our life, from the way we communicate to the way we consume news, information, shop, navigate, entertain ourselves, transact with other people around the world. And that is example two in terms of the shift that I'm seeing on the way the world has changed and how this is something which creates a lot of lessons for us of living, working, and succeeding in a global marketplace. I want to move to example three, which is somewhere related to example two. This is again in the 90s, on Park Street. I remember clearly once seeing a sprinkling of people in the Park Street area using cell phones. That was the first time I saw really a person using a cell phone. And again, I remember it was somewhere in 96, 97 in that time frame that a crowd actually gathered around a person close to Trinkas while the person was using the phone, just to see the marvel of technology that was, and just to really see for yourself what's happening. Like other forms of technology, of course, over the past 25, 30 years, cell phones have become ubiquitous. Just looking at the way they've evolved. Today, we're talking of cell phone ownership, which is at an all-time high in most of the G20 countries. And very, very large percentage of these people put this data between 60% to 80% owning smartphones, which have actually transformed a telephone from not just a communication device to a full-fledged handheld personal computer, which is capable of undertaking so many tasks which a large machine 2 decades ago could not undertake. So that's example three. Example one was around the way the population has been expanded. Example two around the internet. Example three around the way computing has really moved to an individual's hand rather than being something very big in a laboratory. I want to talk of example four, and this is about money. If you, again, some of you might have heard stories that in the 90s, it used to take hours to withdraw money from a bank, your own money, just to get that money There were people who were working in organizations who used to take leave for half a day so that they could go to a bank and get things done. And large banks were really institutions, reliable, respected. Fast forward to today, two things have happened. One, of course, the way money is used, the way transactions are done is completely different. Even if you are buying something which is worth 5 rupees, there is a possibility to transact that in a digital fashion. And at the same time, paradoxically, on the other hand, in many countries, including in America, including to an extent in India, young people especially have some sort of a distrust of the banking and the global financial system. And there was a big financial crisis. Some of you might have heard of it in 2008, which contributed to people's perception about greed and corruption. And there were movements like the Occupy Wall Street movement a few years later, which showed the mirror on income inequality and factors that the way we looked at our financial system. I think that changed dramatically from there on. So that's example 4 in terms of the way the world is shifted, looked at from the context of money and large financial institutions. Now I want to talk example 5, again, something which over the past, let's say, 2 to 3 decades. Now, today is the 20th of April. I think the temperature today in Calcutta is likely to be a maximum of 42, minimum of 28. That is what the temperature is likely to be. I was tracking data, and 30 years ago, in 1993, on the 20th of April, the maximum temperature was 37 degrees in Calcutta, and the minimum temperature was about 25. And this is not an isolated phenomena. If you actually track it over a period of time, if you look at monthly cohorts, weekly cohorts, on an average, Calcutta is about 3 degrees hotter than what it was at any point of time in the 90s, when you compare the same period of time. And it's just one example. It's true for every place in the world. A lot of research has been ongoing about the changing climate for decades. A lot of people have been researching on it, but the impact of this, some of the devastating effects of this have become especially apparent in recent years. If you look at weather-related records, they're being shattered at an alarming pace, and the past few years have been some of the hottest in human history. And the environmental changes due to the changing patterns of human lifestyle, due to the changing patterns of consumption, they're altering the planet like never before. And that's one big mega trend that is impacting and will continue to impact in a manner that is going to be completely non-linear, the way we look at the world and the way we compete in this world and the way we look at the global economy. The next 2 examples are not spread over 3 decades. The next 2 examples are actually spread over a much shorter period of time. From 30 years to about 3 years is my next example. Which obviously relates to something which many of you would have had some sort of a direct experience of, which is around the COVID pandemic and the crisis, which altered so many things, but it also accelerated the pace of digital transformation. So, for example, an implication for all of us is that we're talking like this in a manner which was also not very easy to envisage just 3 years ago. The fact that you are in some physical location, I'm in another, and we are able to seamlessly transact and interact is because of the massive acceleration in the pace of digital transformation that's happened around the world. And add to this the expansion in e-commerce and increase in the pace of adoption of things like telemedicine, online teaching, fintech. Suddenly you realize so many new entrepreneurial opportunities opened up because of this unlocking that's happened over the past 3 years. And at the same time, as much as opportunities opened up, when you look at global businesses, companies with international supply chains started experiencing a lot of challenges, bottlenecks, and shortages in dealing with an interconnected global supply chain, many of which got disrupted on account of the pandemic. So that was example 6. Now I want to just briefly mention example 7, and it's very difficult to really even say what the implication of this example could be. And this is maybe less than past 1 year. I'm sure everybody's heard of ChatGPT, everybody's heard of artificial intelligence, everybody's heard of how things have changed. And if you look at it, while this has been around, you would have heard this word 5-7 years. People have been talking about it. But somehow what's happened in the last 6 months is likely to be such a huge impact around the world that it's something which is difficult to even foresee what it's likely to be. It's still playing out, and it will continue to play out in unprecedented ways. And the ways at which we look at situations, the ways in which we look at jobs, the way in which we look at work, the way in which we look at priorities, the way in which we look at people interacting with each other, the way in which we look at the future of organizations, all of this is subject to massive disruption in the course of the next few years. And some of it really has been accelerated because of the changes that we've seen in the last few months. And that is something which will still play out. So very difficult to really predict how it will play out. But one thing is for sure, absolutely 100%, that it will play out in a big manner that it's difficult to even imagine today. Now, I'll kind of pause on these 6-7 examples that I took. And, I hope that by hearing these examples, you do get a sense that the world order, the world has changed in a big way in the recent years. Macroeconomic factors, conventional wisdom is being turned on its head. Conventional power equations are getting disrupted like never before. Interdependence is becoming a way of life. People in one part of the world getting impacted in a big way from what's happening in another. The impact of technology and automation, briefly touched upon it, is so dramatic that it's difficult to even predict how it's going to kind of move further. And human intervention is kind of changing things like never before for the planet, for the environment, and therefore with a strong implication on what all of us are going to do. The population growth, consumption, energy use, land use changes, pollution, these are driving forces of global change. How do these factors impact ecological systems and human societies? We live in a world where there is a profound impact of all of these things on the global environment. Geopolitically as well, I think things have changed big time. India in general is a place where more and more people are keen to work with and work along with, much more than what it was, let's say, in the 90s. And it has subsequently kept growing over the years. So it is in this kind of a world, that the ability to operate at the intersections of various trends, for example, of technology and healthcare, of manufacturing and technology, of education and technology, that lots of new white spaces are getting created for people to work on and for people to find and create new opportunities. And many of these white spaces are about the right identification of a problem, the right understanding of a consumer need, the right empathy towards a consumer in terms of what their requirements are, no matter whether it's a kind of a localized requirement or a much larger global requirement. And the crux, therefore, and especially relevant because I understand this is the entrepreneurship cell and a lot of people are very keen to see how they can solve more of the world's problems. Crux is really to solve the identified problems, creating more equity, creating more well-being, creating a better life. And automatically, what it will do is it will generate value, it will generate wealth. And the question always is, can the solution that one of us is providing, can it be cheaper? Can it be faster? Can it be easier? Can it be smoother to implement? Can it be more scalable? All of these things become factors which relate to the right identification of a problem and really the right empathy with the needs of the consumer. And while we look at all of these answers, none of them are easy questions to answer, but it's also important to recognize that none of them can also be solved single-handedly. There's a huge amount of need to collaborate, and therefore collaboration, much more than competition, could become the way of winning in a global economy. uh, I would actually also caution a little bit not to fall in the seductive trap of valuations. I would much rather stay in the compelling possibility of solutioning and finding solutions to some of the problems which are genuine and which exist in the world, given the way things are changing. I think that would be a much more compelling way to look at the solution, especially for young people like you who are on this call and who are very hungry and eager and energetic to go out and make a difference in the world. I think as you do that, it's also very, very important to stay real and stay authentic, to do something that's truly novel and to solve a problem, make it accessible to as many people as possible. Maybe run test runs on yourself and your family. And if it works in a shorter cohort, obviously chances are people have similar kind of issues and they will be able to you'll be able to run it and solve it in a much better manner at scale. I think aiming to solve the problem, doing it well, understanding the customer, operating on cost, operating on the experience of the consumer, operating on service excellence. I think those are some of the areas which would be important to collaborate to solve better. And with that, I want to kind of share three broad approaches to win in the global economy. And as the topic was mentioned, to compete in a global economy. So I would actually slightly broad base the definition from competing to include collaborating. So it's not just about competing, it's also about collaborating and eventually winning so that you're able to really make a difference to some sort of a issue that the world is facing or the world is likely to face. So the first one in terms of the broad approach is what we briefly touched upon a while ago. And that is on the understanding of the customer, the understanding of the consumer, the understanding of the needs of the consumer, and doing it in a local context. That is absolutely imperative. The needs of a consumer could be at one level similar, but I think if you look at it in different parts of the world, the need could be very different from what it is in Calcutta to what it is in New York. And therefore, view that kind of marries the local context with some sort of a broader problem statement. I think that's something which is very, very important. And it's true whether you're talking of a B2B business or you're talking of a B2C, no matter what you're talking about. Some examples, maybe you have experienced, many of you might have seen and eaten burger at McDonald's. And, if you go to any store in India, you would see a huge element of localization, which is almost imperative for even a very large global corporation like McDonald's to survive. There is a burger which has aloo tikki, which is only made in India, which is made and served in the outlets in India and not served elsewhere. And that is because of the unique nature of the consumer in India, some vegetarian, some wanting, not wanting to have meat, some not wanting to have egg products, and so on. So I think thinking local, especially to market your products, this is something which you've probably experienced at some point of time. I've been working in the field of healthcare. And, in this field also, for example, if you look at requirements locally, There has to be a very strong awareness of the healthcare system, the patient needs, pricing regulations, the drug regulatory framework, the distribution channels, the promotional approaches of a particular country in as detailed a manner as a local player if you have to succeed. And therefore, the localization of the product or the service offering as per the country needs becomes absolutely imperative. In the US, for example, again, sticking on to healthcare, if you buy medicines, they are typically sold in bottles of about hundreds of tablets. But in, let's say, countries where in India, where a lot of people pay out of pocket and there is not as much insurance penetration on healthcare, people typically buy medicines in in a strip of 2 pills or 5 pills, and you go to a chemist shop, somebody just cuts it from a 10 blister pack so that the patient can buy smaller quantities more frequently, because eventually the patient is paying out of pocket and there is much lesser coverage through insurance. So these are a few examples which I just wanted to share on the first part, which is around the understanding of the need of the consumer, and that is absolutely imperative to winning in a global marketplace. So the understanding of the consumer translates to certain broad level expectations, at the same time has to be very, very clearly detailed from a localized standpoint from what the customer needs. So that's number one in terms of winning in a global marketplace. The second thing which I want to talk about from the standpoint of winning in a global marketplace is on cost. Now, I know that a lot of students here are interested in different kinds of businesses. A lot of students have the aspiration to be entrepreneurs, and all of this has multiple dimensions to it. But one dimension which always stays relevant is the dimension of cost. Now, if you look at any global enterprise, if you look at any global business, the global companies which are competitive will always choose a supply chain where they're able to bring the cost of their product down as much as possible. Now, those companies remain competitive and they're able to differentiate themselves because they can offer their products in a much more cost competitive fashion compared to what others can do. For example, many of us are wearing clothes which are probably made in India. Some of them could also be made outside India. Bangladesh, for example, not far from India, is a place where most of the global apparel companies are sourcing their stuff. They're sourcing their merchandise. I once had the opportunity to interact with the supply chain head of Macy's, which is one of the largest largest store brands in the US. And what I understood from them was that there's a very, very sharp mechanism that is in place to look at every element of the cost globally, understand which portion would probably bring that element cost down, and people are calculating it to the digit of decimal in terms of the cost. And as a consequence of that, when you put it at scale, you're able to not only offer something which is able to be accessible by a much larger mass of consumers, but at the same time keep your business more sustainable and profitable. So cost is really a very, very key element, and this example around apparels and clothing, especially with Bangladesh and Vietnam, was something I wanted to share. Again, I want to share one more example from healthcare area where I've been working for more than 2 decades. So if you look at the price of medicine, the price of medicine is very different in India, in Europe, in the United States. And one of the reasons is that a lot of medicines that are sold in the US or in the EU, actually the ingredients for those are sourced from countries like India, they're sourced from countries like China. And therefore, supply chains that are geographically concentrated in low-cost geography create the enabling environment for highly competitive global companies. The level of interdependence is very high. Currently, I see it at an all-time high, which also creates some risks and some potential challenges. But it's a fact of life, and interdependence is going to remain at a very, very high level. And this recognition of interdependence and a subsequent balanced approach, both to risk as well as to opportunity, determines the robustness of the value chain and enables an uninterrupted supply of both goods and services to consumers, resulting in a cost position which can potentially be accessed by a very, very large mass of consumers around the world. So that's the second aspect which I wanted to detail out a little bit around cost. The first one was around the understanding of the customer and the empathy. The second one is around cost. Then the third one I want to talk about is around distinctive differentiation, some sort of differentiation that can come about by innovation. It could have multiple elements, including the element of service, including this element of experience, which is a must for an organization to be globally competitive. While cost optimization can be mimicked, product localization can potentially be mimicked, but distinctive differentiation, either through experience or through innovation, is a lot more difficult to mimic. And a lot of this also contributes towards competitiveness and distinctiveness that you're offering, whether as a small business or as a large enterprise, plays out when you look at operating in a global place. And a lot of this is also based on collaborative approaches, because again, remember, not everyone can do everything. And these collaborative approaches, which create some sort of a distinctive differentiation, are sometimes very pivotal to the experience of the customer and for customer delight. So similarly, in service differentiation, a lot of it is about making making the workforce customer centric, something that is difficult to mimic. I'm sure most of you have experienced Amazon in some shape or form. And, for example, Amazon Prime, I don't know if any of you are members of Amazon Prime, but you know that one of the things that you always get when you're a member of Amazon Prime is a service level guarantee, speed guarantee. And it's not that, it's only for one person. It is an experience which is replicated across the board each and every time you're transacting. While Amazon is, of course, a huge, huge enterprise, it's not necessarily Amazon alone. Even if you look at the small Kirana store close to where you are, so many times you just make a phone call and the person at the other end of the phone call knows exactly what you need, knows exactly the kind of service levels that are required, knows exactly what is to be done. And some of these provide a huge amount of customer delight. And for us as consumers, they provide a massive amount of experience that we love. And that is what makes a lot of people stick on to some of these businesses, in spite of all that we are seeing around us in the world. So I think that's the third part around distinctive differentiation through innovation and the customer experience, which is extremely relevant for somebody to compete in a global marketplace. So I think net, if I bring it all together, I think these are some ways in which one can look at not just competing, but collaborating and winning in global markets. And as all of you bright, energetic youngsters get on to the next phase of your life, I hope that you will not only be able to understand what it takes to compete in these global markets, you will also be able to create a massive difference to the world around you with your ideas, with your entrepreneurship, with your energy, and your ability to constantly learn in a world that is always changing. So all the very best to everyone, and I'm happy to take any questions or receive any comments. Thank you.
So thank you so much for those insightful words of wisdom. It was great to learn about competing in the global economy from a person of your stature. So, sir, we had a question which goes like, in a global market, how can businesses strike a balance between the need to invest in long-term profit and short-term profitability and long-term growth plans, and what are some of the important trade-offs involved?
Right, right. It's a great question. Who has this? Who put this question? I mean, if that person can just come on video, and I think it's a great question.
So, sir, one of the viewers on YouTube had put this question.
Oh, sure, sure. So I'll try to address it in a very practical way. When you run a business, you're always having short-term expectations from your stakeholders. So, for example, I run the business for a listed company which is listed on both New York Stock Exchange and and in India. And there is always an expectation to demonstrate the right kind of performance in the short term, quarter on quarter. You need to demonstrate growth. You need to demonstrate the right metrics, both financial and otherwise. And I think that is very, very important from the expectation of the investors and the larger mass of stakeholders. At the same time, I think when you're running a business, you have to realize that you are only the custodian of that business for a certain period of time. A business is a going concern, and it will continue for a very, very long period of time. So maybe some of the things that you're doing today, you're enjoying the fruits of a seed which was planted by someone many years ago, which eventually led to the health of the business getting better, and therefore you're able to leverage the benefit of that today in financial terms. So it's absolutely imperative that the right balance between achieving the short-term objective with building the business for the future, building the health of the business, creating those areas where the future of the business will lie in a few years to come. That balance is really one of the most important tasks for a business head or for a CEO or for a CXO, because it's not unidimensional. And just focusing on the short term could mean that you miss out completely on a trend for the long term, which can result in your entire enterprise getting wiped out. We've seen examples. For example, you might have heard of a company called Kodak, which was the world's leading company for photography equipments and cameras. Somehow they did not really gauge the magnitude with which the entire digital photography would come in, and how it had the potential to completely wipe off their whole business, which in a way it did, and therefore the valuation of the company fell from somewhere here to somewhere there, and created a huge impact. Now, had somebody had the eye on the long term, had somebody really got the sense of how the world is changing, then probably some actions might have been taken at that point of time to prevent this kind of a dramatic fall. And that is why in the beginning of this talk, I spoke about a few mega trends in this world. It's very, very important to understand what's going on in the world around us, so that as a person who's heading a business, you're also able to keep your eye on the long term, because otherwise just focusing on short term could mean that the short term is probably the end of it all. And you might suddenly see, with a huge explosion in technology, with a huge explosion in some of the macro factors around you, that there is no long term to live by. Therefore, I think as a broad tactic, I would say I would actually look at some CXO spending maybe 30 to 40% time on the short term, and actually investing 60 to 70% of your time on the long term, because business is always a going concern. It continues independent of people. It continues independent of which individual is doing what role at a point in time. And it is something you owe it for the people who are going to run the organization in the future. So that's probably my response to this question, but a great question.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes. So the second question from my side, sir, when do you think is the right time for a startup to start targeting global markets? And so according to you, what are some ground rules that they should follow for the survival in such markets?
So let's try to analyze your question in a little bit more detail. So the first part of your question is that what is the right time to start targeting global markets? Now, I would actually say that the way to rephrase this question is that what is the right time to start targeting any market? And again, in my view, if you're able to add value to a smaller mass of consumers, even if it is local, it is a very important proof of concept that you need to be successful on, which can eventually then, lead to much larger expansion geographically or globally. So I think the right time, in my view, is to firmly establish the proof of concept, firmly establish some sort of a acceptance by consumers and people really giving feedback that what you're doing is really helpful and useful in solving some real problem that is there in the world. And I think that's the time when you have that litmus test, pass that litmus test. That's when you can look at expanding geographically or in some other shape or form. But I think without that right proof of concept, there is a chance that you might be putting the cart before the horse. And, depending on how you're financing it yourself, how much appetite you have, how much deep pockets you have, I think you might end up making some mistakes without really having fully established the proof of concept. So I would very much focus on the proof of concept, very much focus on the success of the proof of concept. I would very much focus on making sure that you're not jumping the gun and you're adding something credible and worthwhile to a consumer. If there is something credible and worthwhile, for sure, I think then it's about how quickly you can scale, how much you can collaborate, how much you can bring in others into the fold. But without that, I would, personally, I would caution.
So, sir, I had another question. So, sir, which industry do you feel that has the highest potential for market innovation in the coming decade? And which startups, like, how do you think startups can be competitive in this particular sector?
Right. So I think it's a great question. And one of the things which I feel is very important in the context of the way the world is changing, because the definition of industry itself is changing. Now, what is, let us say I'm in healthcare. Who are the major players in healthcare? Who could come up with some names? Who could be the major players in healthcare tomorrow? The names could be very different. Google could be a healthcare player. Apple could be a healthcare player, which they are not so today. And the reason is that the way the interconnectedness in the world is changing, the way the intersections are getting created. I think that is something which is phenomenal and which we are privileged to be a part of an opportunity when so much of new stuff is happening around us in the world. And I think it is the ability to operate at these intersections. For example, the intersection of technology and healthcare, the intersection of manufacturing and technology, the intersection of education and technology. I think these are the places where a lot of white spaces will get created. And this is also the place where a lot of opportunities will be there for young, energetic startups, because they will be able to see things from multiple dimensions and not just one dimension. And I think these, any industry where there is a strong element of tech, there's a strong element of technology, that will disrupt everything around us. And therefore, the intersection of tech and other things, for example, tech and healthcare, tech and manufacturing, all of this, in my view, will be very, very important and interesting spaces for people to look at going ahead. All of you are student, education and tech. I think we've been seeing it. There have been ups and downs, but eventually, I think the future of education will have a very strong element of tech in it as well. So that's one intersection area that I feel very strongly about. The other intersection area I also want to talk is around social impact, where you actually see the ability of good ideas, the ability of technology, the ability of coming up with new innovation to solve some of the issues that have been plaguing the world, to remove some of the inequity that we've been seeing around us in the world. And I think that is where you are actually bringing together a strong idea, strong technology, strong innovation, and marrying it with social impact, create some sort of social entrepreneurial venture. I think that is also a place where I think there's a huge scope for all of us to do things because of the nature of the world and because of some sort of an inequitable nature in the way the world has been moving over the past 2 to 3 decades. So that would be my kind of broad areas which I would potentially point at when you look at which areas or which industry could be potentially relevant for startups.
Thank you so much, sir, for your answer.
Sir, you yourself talked about ChatGPT and AI platform. Sir, moving forward on these lines, sir, how do you think can companies effectively leverage technology such as data analytics, artificial intelligence, and automation to enhance their competitiveness, or in your terms, collaboration in global economy?
Right. No, I'm seeing one on my, I don't know whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook. I see one ad keeps coming last few weeks. It says that ChatGPT will not take away jobs. A person knowing ChatGPT will take away jobs. So I think it's about understanding what the potential of these technologies is and looking at ways in which it can be applied in a meaningful and credible fashion. I think that is probably one of the most important things that that we have to be very mindful of. And if you just remember what is the basic thing in artificial intelligence, it's about perceiving, it's about synthesizing, and it's about inferring information, which is something which is done by machines or by an algorithm, as opposed to intelligence displayed by a human being. And I think, while we have seen things in the past like speech recognition, computer vision, translation between natural languages, but now, of course, the game is changing in a big way. And there's a much higher level of automated decision making. And, therefore, some of the tasks which conventionally required intelligence are being replicated by some of these phenomena. And that is what is becoming more and more routine as a way of life. And I think this routine nature of artificial intelligence is something we have to understand and we have to accept. It's not something which is going to go away. It's something which is going to stay here and be a part of all of us. And I think the more we learn about it, the more we embrace it, the more we are in a position to start utilizing it in whatever we are doing, in whichever area we are working on. I think our ability to use it for the right purposes will become very, very important. At the same time, I think many things we don't know. And I think it's important to be conscious and humble to say that I do not know many of the things. I will be conscious about the things that I do not know, yet I will keep learning. I will keep learning so that some of these areas I keep picking and I keep learning on the go. And as a consequence of that, I'm able to utilize them for solving whatever problem I wish to solve through my idea or through my startup or through my enterprise. So I look at it as a huge opportunity for everyone here on this call. Uh, I look at it as something, if you can learn and be ahead of the curve, it can differentiate you in a manner that will be unprecedented. You'll be the early adopters. You'll be able to go much ahead of the curve, and as a consequence of that, create solutions both in terms of products and in terms of services, which the world has not seen before.
So, sir, like when we talk about global economy and global expansion within companies, people often raise points like cultural differences and international partnerships. So, sir, what strategies do you think that companies can employ effectively to tackle the issues of cultural differences and build successful international partnerships? And like, how do you think companies can customize their asset allocation to suit this particular purpose?
Sure. So I think again, very good question, especially on the cultural differences. The Again, if I look at the past many years of working closely with people from all over the world, I think cultural differences are almost like the layers of an onion. You've all seen an onion, right? And if you start peeling the layers of an onion, at the fundamental level, I think human needs are common. At the fundamental level, the requirements that typically each consumer would have would broadly be common. You would need to localize. There would be, you know, some layers outside which could be different from those that are there with someone else. But understanding that it's like the layers of an onion, as you peel it through, you fundamentally are talking of something very similar around the world. When you talk of businesses, businesses have more or less similar objectives around the world, which are operating in one kind of a system. But to get to that core, I think you need to navigate through these layers of the onion in a manner that is empathetic, in a manner that is respectful, in a manner that stems from a space of understanding of each other, and neither from a space of superiority or from a space of inferiority. I think people love to connect to human beings. People don't like to consider themselves as either big or small or something like that. And especially when you are in business together, when you are forging international partnerships, I think a lot of people do want to make sure that they're in a partnership where their voice is heard, where they're respected, where there is something truly win-win over the long term. And I think that is one very important aspect I want to emphasize here, that create long-term partnerships. That's the key. It could mean that there could be a little bit of a short-term blip you might have to see in your numbers or in your profits. But when you look at the consolidated value of a collaboration or a partnership over the long term, kind of far outweighs any short-term benefits that you might have. And the truly successful partnerships are the ones which last for the long term, and not which are transactional or which relate to something over the short term. So I would very strongly urge you to peel the layers of the onion, understand those cultural differences, get to the core of it, create long-term win-win partnerships based on respect for each individual, and then much higher degree of empathy and connect with whosoever your partner is. And on the basis of that, I'm sure you'll be able to create sustainable long-term partnerships.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much for your answers to all our questions. So we'll be concluding this session with the vote of thanks from Shita.
Thank you.
Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. Effective leadership is essential for progress, and to us, it was Mr. Deepak Sapra's continuous learning and his willingness to adapt to changing circumstances that enabled him to inspire and guide others towards success, making him a role model for aspiring leaders. After such an enriching session, it is an absolute honor and my pleasant duty to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the Entrepreneurship Development Cell of St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. With immense appreciation and gratitude, I thank Sir for being present with us today and taking out time from their busy schedule to furnish the bright minds with such practical and valuable inputs about the corporate world that have enlightened us and left us with a hunger to learn more. We are sure that the learnings from this session will act as a guiding light and hold our audience in good stead for the future. A special mention to our respected principal, Reverend Dr. Dominic Savio SJ, and Vice Principals, Reverend Dr. Joseph Kalandai SJ, Reverend Dr. Peter Arukim SJ, and Professor Bertram D. Silva for encouraging us to pursue greatness and live up to the great Zavarian reputation. I would further like to thank our faculty advisor, Dr. Arup Kumar Mitra, for his leading supervision and inspiration at every juncture. We sincerely acknowledge our audience for being patient, interactive, and putting forth such compelling questions. Last but not the least, I would extend a deep sense of appreciation for all the support, timely implementation, and guidance provided by the members of the Entrepreneurship Development Cell. And lastly, we have our closing session with Mr. Vivek Sharma from 2:30 p.m. and we look forward to having you all there. We owe the success of the session to you. Once again, thank you all for tuning in with ADC. Have a pleasant day.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you.